Every horizon holds a story, untold, unseen, and waiting to unfold. Welcome to Souls of the Horizon, where we journey into the heart of human experience through the art of storytelling. From whispered legends to personal odysseys, each tale reveals the soul's uncharted territories. Whether it's a moment of triumph, heartbreak, or mystery, these stories will inspire, provoke, and resonate. So take a step with us, where every ending is a new beginning, and the horizon is just the start. This is Souls of the Horizon.
In a digital age, Harry's love breaking out of range. Solar mission breaking down the wall. 60 years deeper.
Zuri, the Souls of the Horizon. The sun bled into the horizon like molten gold spilling over the edge of existence. It wasn't just another sunset. For those attuned to the unseen, it was a threshold, a moment when the veil between the physical world and the realm of souls grew thin, and the mysteries of the universe whispered in colors too vivid to name. And for Zuri, it was the beginning of a journey she hadn't asked for but somehow always known was hers to take. Zuri had never felt at home in the ordinary world. She wasn't sure if it was the recurring dreams that haunted her since childhood, visions of vast landscapes where she was forever searching but never finding, or the peculiar way she seemed to sense emotions that others kept hidden. Her grandmother used to say she had an old soul, but Zuri suspected it was something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. On this particular evening, she stood alone on the cliffs outside her small coastal town. The air hummed with a strange tension, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. The dreams had been more vivid than ever lately, filled with symbols she couldn't ignore, an ancient tree with roots that glowed like veins of light, a storm swirling with voices that spoke in riddles, and always, the horizon. It beckoned her, not as a distant line, but as a living entity that pulsed and shimmered, as if it held secrets just out of reach. Tonight, she felt it again, that uncanny sensation of being watched. Not by human eyes, but by something vast and unknowable. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to ground herself. The wind shifted, carrying a faint melody, a song that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Her heart raced. She had heard this melody before, in her dreams. Suddenly, a voice broke the stillness, low and resonant, like the echo of a mountain speaking. "You've been called, Jasmine Kateria. It's time." Zuri spun around, her breath catching in her throat. A figure stood a few feet away, cloaked in shadows despite the fading light. He was tall, his presence commanding yet oddly familiar, as if she had known him in some other life. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the last rays of the sun. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling but steady. "A guide," he said simply. "And so much more, if you choose to walk this path." "What path? I don't understand." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "You will. But first, you must see." Before she could protest, he raised a hand and traced a symbol in the air, a sigil that seemed to hang in space, glowing faintly like the embers of a dying fire. The wind picked up, swirling around her in a vortex of sound and light. Zuri felt her feet leave the ground, her body weightless as the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. The horizon, the one she had dreamed of so many times, stretched before her now, vast and infinite. But it was no longer a boundary. It was a doorway. She landed softly on a field of luminous grass that shimmered like starlight. Above her, the sky was neither day nor night but an endless expanse of shifting hues. She could feel the ground beneath her vibrating gently, as if alive. The air was thick with the hum of unseen forces, a symphony of energies intertwining in ways her mind could barely comprehend. The cloaked figure stood beside her, his presence solid and reassuring in this strange, otherworldly place. "This is the horizon," he said, his voice reverent. "The place where the souls of the living and the echoes of the eternal meet." Zuri looked around, her heart pounding. "Why am I here?" "Because you're a weaver," he said, as if the word explained everything. "One of the rare souls who can navigate the threads that bind worlds together." She frowned. "Weaver? I think you've got the wrong person. I'm just me." "Are you?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Or have you always known there was more to you, to this life, than what you've been told?" His words struck a chord deep within her, a resonance she couldn't deny. The dreams, the feelings, the unshakable sense that she was meant for something more, it all led to this moment. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure gestured to the sky, where countless points of light swirled in intricate patterns, forming constellations that seemed to pulse with life. "The souls of the horizon are out of balance. The threads that connect them are fraying, unraveling. If they break, the boundary between worlds will collapse, and chaos will consume both." Zuri felt a chill run through her. "How am I supposed to stop that?" "By remembering who you are," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "By embracing your role as a weaver. You've carried this gift through countless lifetimes, and now, the time has come to use it." "What if I fail?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, his glowing eyes locking onto hers. "You won't." And so began Zuri's journey through the horizon, a world where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual blurred, where every choice she made rippled across the tapestry of existence. Along the way, she would encounter souls in need, ancient guardians of forgotten wisdom, and shadows born from the deepest fears of humanity. She would face trials that tested not only her strength but her very understanding of who she was and what it meant to be a soul in a universe of infinite connections. But above all, she would learn that the horizon was not just a place. It was a mirror of her own inner world, a reflection of the limitless potential within her to heal, to create, and to weave the threads of existence back into harmony. Chapter 2: Threads of Light. The rippling sky of the horizon seemed to grow more alive with every step Zuri took, its shifting hues of gold and indigo pulsating like a living heartbeat. The air itself carried a vibrancy that hummed through her veins, a resonance that felt like both a melody and a warning. Each breath she took seemed to fill her with a restless energy, as though the horizon itself was awakening something dormant within her. The guide strode ahead, his movements purposeful and fluid. His cloak billowed lightly, catching the iridescent light, though no wind seemed to move. "The horizon isn't just a place," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "It's a mirror. Here, what lies hidden within you will be revealed, not only to yourself, but to the forces that dwell here." Zuri frowned, her hands balling into fists. "And what exactly does that mean? Are we safe here?" The guide slowed his pace but didn't turn to face her. "Safety isn't the right question. The horizon isn't hostile or kind, it reflects your truths. And some truths are harder to face than others." She swallowed hard, her gaze sweeping over the crystalline pathway that seemed to glow faintly with her every step. The road ahead stretched into infinity, constantly shifting between fields of starlit grass and glittering bridges suspended over bottomless voids. To her left, a cascade of water poured from nowhere into an unseen depth, the water sparkling like liquid silver. She felt awe, but also unease, as though the beauty of the place was merely a mask for something deeper and more complex. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why was I brought here?" "Because you've always been connected to this place," the guide replied. "You've felt it, haven't you? That sense of being out of step with the world, as though you belong somewhere else. This is where the threads of your existence converge. But why you were chosen?" He paused, his glowing eyes meeting hers. "That is something you must uncover for yourself." As they walked, the landscape around them began to shift. The crystalline pathway dissolved into soft, glowing moss, and the horizon darkened, the vibrant colors giving way to deep shades of twilight. Zuri noticed faint, flickering shapes moving just beyond her vision, shadows that disappeared whenever she tried to focus on them. They weren't threatening, but their presence unsettled her, like echoes of memory she couldn't quite grasp. "Are those spirits?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The guide glanced toward the shifting shadows. "Echoes," he said. "Fragments of souls who've walked this path before. They are drawn to your light, to your presence. Some may offer guidance. Others—" He trailed off, his tone growing somber. "Others may test your resolve." Zuri shivered but said nothing, her unease deepening as the shadows began to gather more thickly around them. Despite her growing apprehension, her feet carried her forward, drawn by an unseen force she couldn't explain. Then, just as the darkness threatened to overwhelm her, the path widened into a clearing bathed in golden light. At the center of the clearing stood a massive tree, its roots glowing faintly with an otherworldly blue, spreading out like veins across the earth. Its trunk shimmered with an inner light, and its branches stretched skyward, each leaf radiating a soft, star-like glow. Zuri felt her breath catch in her throat. The tree was beautiful, yes, but more than that, it felt alive in a way that defied explanation. Its presence filled her with a profound sense of awe, as though it held within it the secrets of the universe. And yet, beneath that awe was something else, a deep, aching familiarity, as though she had stood before this tree many times before, in lifetimes she could no longer remember. The tree of resonance, the guide said, his voice reverent. Its roots connect to the souls of all who have ever lived. Touch it, and it will show you what you need to see. Zuri hesitated, her heart pounding. What if I'm not ready for what it shows me? The tree will only reveal what you are prepared to face, the guide assured her. But you must be willing to open yourself to it. She stared at the tree, her hands trembling. What if it revealed something she wasn't ready to confront? What if it unraveled everything she thought she knew about herself? But despite her fear, she felt an undeniable pull toward it, as though the tree itself was calling to her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and placed her hand against the bark. The moment her fingers made contact, the world around her dissolved into a cascade of light and sound. She was no longer standing in the clearing. Instead, she found herself in a vast, open field under a sky filled with shifting constellations. The stars above her seemed to pulse with life, their light forming intricate patterns that shimmered like a living tapestry. As she watched, the constellations began to shift, taking the shapes of symbols she didn't recognize but felt she had seen before. The field beneath her feet shifted, too, and suddenly, she was standing in a dense forest. Shadows moved between the trees, and she felt her pulse quicken as the air grew heavy with an unspoken tension. The shadows began to coalesce into forms, humanoid but not quite human, their faces obscured. One stepped forward, its hand outstretched, and though it didn't speak, Zuri felt its presence fill her mind. "You've forgotten," the figure said, its voice echoing inside her. But the threads remain. Before she could respond, the vision changed again. She was standing at the base of the mountain, its peak shrouded in mist. A figure stood at the summit, their back turned to her. She felt an overwhelming sense of recognition, as though this person was both a stranger and someone deeply familiar. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. The figure didn't answer. Instead, they raised their hand and pointed toward the sky. Zuri followed their gesture, and her eyes widened as she saw the constellations above her align into the shape of a massive sigil, the same sigil the guide had drawn in the air when she first arrived in the horizon. And then, just as suddenly as the visions began, they ended. She was back in the clearing, her hand still pressed against the tree. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Tears streamed down her face, though she didn't know why. "What did you see?" the guide asked gently. "I saw fragments," she said, her voice trembling. "Memories, maybe. Pieces of a life I don't remember. And the mountain. There's someone waiting for me there." The guide nodded, his expression unreadable. "The mountain is the nexus. But the journey will not be easy. The shadows you saw in the forest. They are reflections of your fears, your doubts. They will try to stop you. But you must face them if you are to reach the summit." Zuri wiped her tears, her hands trembling. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted. "What if I fail?" The guide stepped closer, his voice steady. "You won't fail. The strength you need is already within you. You've carried it through countless lifetimes. Now is the time to remember." She took a deep breath, forcing herself to her feet. The fear was still there, gnawing at the edges of her resolve, but beneath it was something else, a spark of determination. "Let's go," she said, her voice steady. The guide inclined his head, and together, they stepped back onto the path. The mountain loomed in the distance, its summit obscured by mist. But Zuri no longer felt like a stranger to this place. The horizon was a part of her, and she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 3: The Whispering Forest. The dense forest loomed before Zuri, its towering trees casting elongated shadows that stretched across the winding path. Each tree seemed alive, their bark resembling gnarled faces frozen mid-expression. Whispers filtered through the air like threads of silk, brushing against her ears in tones too faint to discern. She hesitated at the edge of the forest, staring into the labyrinth of darkness ahead. The vibrant light of the tree of resonance faded behind her, leaving her with only the faint glow of the sigil that lingered on her palm. It pulsed like a distant heartbeat, a dim but persistent light. "The forest is a threshold," the guide said, standing at her side. "It will test you." "Test me how?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her efforts to sound steady. The guide's glowing eyes flickered. "This forest is made of the shadows you carry. Every regret, every fear, every moment you've hidden from yourself dwells here. They will take form, and they will confront you." Zuri's stomach churned. She wanted to protest, to turn back, but the faint pull of the mountain, far in the distance, called to her like a beacon. The figure in her vision was waiting for her, and some part of her knew she couldn't abandon this journey. "And what about you?" she asked, turning to the guide. "Will you stay with me?" His expression remained unreadable. "I will walk beside you, but this is your path. No one can face your shadows for you." Her hands trembled as she stepped forward. The moment her foot touched the mossy ground of the forest, the air changed. It became heavier, almost suffocating, and the whispers grew louder, still indistinct but layered with an eerie rhythm. The sigil on her palm glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed, as though bracing itself for what lay ahead. The deeper they ventured into the forest, the darker it grew. The trees seemed to close in around her, their roots twisting across the path like veins. The whispers sharpened into voices, not many, but one, familiar and insistent. It was her own voice, echoing her darkest thoughts back to her. "You don't belong here," it said. "You're not strong enough for this. You'll fail." Zuri froze, her breath catching in her throat. The words struck her with an unsettling clarity, like the echo of a truth she had tried to bury. She looked at the guide, but he offered no reassurance. Instead, he gestured toward the path ahead. "Keep walking," he said simply. She forced herself forward, each step heavier than the last. The voices continued, growing louder and more specific. They whispered of mistakes she had made, opportunities she had lost, and fears she had never spoken aloud. The trees seemed to lean closer, their gnarled faces twisting into grotesque mockeries of her own reflection. She clenched her fists, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a flicker of movement, but then it took form. The figure was tall, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that burned like coals. Its presence sent a chill down her spine, and she felt an almost magnetic pull toward it, a mixture of fear and familiarity. The guide stopped a few paces behind her, watching silently. "Who are you?" Zuri demanded, though her voice wavered. The figure tilted its head, and when it spoke, its voice was her own, but warped and distorted. "I am the weight you carry. The shadow you deny." She took a step back, her chest tightening. "You're me?" The figure's mouth curled into a twisted smile. "I am the part of you that you've tried to leave behind. The doubts. The anger. The guilt. Did you think you could walk this path without facing me?" Zuri's heart pounded. She wanted to run, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. The sigil on her palm glowed faintly, and she clenched her fist around it, drawing strength from its warmth. I'm not afraid of you," she said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. The shadow laughed, a sound that echoed through the forest like shattering glass. "You should be. You've buried me for so long, but I've never left. I've grown stronger in your silence." As it spoke, the shadows around it began to shift and writhe, forming into smaller figures that encircled her. They whispered in tones that sounded like her own thoughts, dredging up memories she had tried to forget. The time she had hurt someone she loved. The opportunity she had let slip away. The nights she had spent doubting her worth. Zuri felt tears welling in her eyes. The weight of the memories pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. She looked back at the guide, but he stood still, his gaze steady but offering no intervention. "You must face it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You cannot move forward until you do." Summoning every ounce of courage she had, Zuri turned back to the shadow. "You're right," she said, her voice trembling. "I've carried you with me for a long time. But you don't control me." The shadow's smile faltered, and for a moment, the whispers around her paused. I've made mistakes, she continued, her voice growing stronger. I've doubted myself. I've been afraid. But those things don't define me. They're just part of my story. And I'm not going to let them hold me back anymore. The sigil on her palm flared brightly, its light cutting through the darkness like a blade. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering and wavering as the light grew stronger. Zuri stepped forward, her fear giving way to determination. You're a part of me, she said. But you don't control me. I'm stronger than you. With a final burst of light, the shadow dissolved, its whispers fading into silence. The smaller figures around her vanished as well, and the oppressive weight that had surrounded her lifted. She fell to her knees, her body trembling, but a sense of relief and clarity washed over her. The guide approached, his expression softer than before. Well done, he said. You've taken the first step. Zuri looked up at him, her eyes filled with questions. Was that it? Is it over? He shook his head. That was only the beginning. The shadows will return, but now you know you can face them. And with each confrontation, you will grow stronger. She nodded, wiping the tears from her face. The path ahead was still dark, but the sigil on her palm glowed brighter now, a reminder of the strength she had found within herself. The whispers in the forest had fallen silent, and for the first time since entering the horizon, she felt a glimmer of hope. As they continued through the forest, the trees began to thin, and the air grew lighter. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of the mountain, its peak still shrouded in mist. But she could also feel something else, a presence watching her, waiting for her. The figure she had seen in her vision was still out there, and she knew that reaching them would require more than just courage. What's next? She asked, her voice steady despite the lingering exhaustion. The guide glanced at her, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Next, you climb. And with that, they stepped out of the forest, the mountain looming ever closer, its shadow stretching across the horizon like a challenge waiting to be answered. Thank you for joining us on this journey beyond the horizon. Until next time, keep exploring, keep dreaming, and remember, every soul has a story, and every story shapes the horizon.
Disclaimer. The J. Bahari podcast is a work of fiction. The characters, incidents, and dialogues are products of the author's imagination and are not to be construed as real. Any resemblance to actual events, locales, or persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. The content of this podcast is intended for entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in the episodes are those of the characters and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other individual, agency, organization, or company. Listener discretion is advised. The podcast may contain language and themes that are not suitable for all audiences, including explicit content, violence, and mature themes. The creators of Souls of the Horizon assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of the podcast. The information provided is on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, or timeliness. By listening to this podcast, you agree to indemnify and hold harmless the creators, hosts, and any associated parties from any and all claims, damages, liabilities, costs, and expenses, including legal fees, arising from your use of the podcast or any information contained therein. Thank you for tuning in, and enjoy the adventure.